The moment this conflict exploded, it changed everything. What began as distant rumblings of tension turned into thunder that shook the very heart of millions of ordinary people across the Middle East. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a sweeping military offensive against Iran. They struck deep into its territory, hitting cities, military installations, and according to official reports, even the residence of Iran's supreme leader. This was not a distant skirmish. This was a shock that sent waves of fear, grief, and disbelief through Iranian streets and homes. Families clutched one another as explosions echoed across the capital. In living rooms and on crowded street corners, people watched in shock as smoke rose over places once defined by their everyday routines. Students, workers, parents, and elders all felt the same question stirring in their minds. What happens now? In Iran, a long history of pressure and isolation had already left deep marks on the national psyche. For years, people have lived with sanctions, restrictions, and the constant threat of conflict. But nothing had prepared them for this moment. It was as if the calm they had grown used to had vanished overnight. And yet, even in that overwhelming uncertainty, a powerful human instinct took hold. The instinct to protect, to resist, and to stand firm in the face of danger. Iran's leaders addressed the nation with a solemn message. This was not an attack Iran would ignore. They spoke of sovereignty, of pride, and of the sacred right of a country to defend its land and its people. And with that message came action. A wave of missiles and drones launched across the Gulf. These were not chaotic flashes in the sky. To many in Iran, these were symbols of a nation refusing to be subdued. Across the Gulf, alarms shrieked and air defenses roared to life. In the United Arab Emirates alone, defense authorities detected and intercepted hundreds of missiles and drones in just a short span of hours. Most were destroyed mid-air, but the sky was no longer a place of debris peace. Fell onto city streets. It had become a theater of survival. 3 foreign workers, a man from Pakistan, one from Nepal, and another from Bangladesh, lost their lives when fragments of intercepted ordnance struck the ground. Dozens more were injured, people from many nations sharing the same city and the same terrifying moment. Nearby, hospitals reported the wounded arriving in waves. Sirens wailed as emergency services rushed to help. Airports, once bustling with travelers and laughter, were dark and silent. Flights were cancelled. Families were separated. The world's busiest terminals, symbols of connection and movement, now stood as stark reminders of how quickly life can pause. But inside Iran, the mood was complicated. There was fear, of course. There was grief for those who died in the first wave of attacks. Iranian news broadcasters spoke of hundreds killed and many more wounded in the initial bombardments. Yet beneath that grief was a thread of unity. People gathered in small groups in Tehran and other cities, sharing stories of loved ones, speaking in hushed tones about what it meant to face such an existential moment. In homes and public squares, ordinary Iranians spoke about resilience and identity. They talked about how, despite sanctions and diplomatic isolation, their nation was still capable of responding when it mattered most. It wasn't pride in destruction, but pride in endurance, the idea that a nation could still fight back when pushed into a corner. That feeling of unity, even in fear, was something many had not felt in years. It was like a long-forgotten instinct had resurfaced. Stand up, stand strong, and do not let fear define you. Yet, for all the emotional weight of resistance, there was another side to this story, one that spoke of hardship, pain, and the stark reality of innocent lives caught in geopolitical conflict. Across the Gulf, civilians from diverse backgrounds experienced fear and loss. In Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, air raid warnings sounded, and people rushed for shelter as explosions lit up the night sky. Communities that had never known such violence suddenly faced the terrifying sound of war overhead. Children held their parents tight. Mothers whispered prayers. Fathers looked toward the sky with eyes that betrayed both fear and resolve. This was not abstract geopolitics anymore. This was life itself, interrupted and transformed in an instant. And so, the narrative that emerged was not simple. Iran claimed its actions were defensive, asserting that the original assault against its land left it no choice but to respond. To many inside the country, that response was a statement of self-respect and refusal to be intimidated. But to others across the region, the sky-high exchanges of missiles and drones were a frightening escalation that disrupted peace and put civilians at risk. In the midst of all this, the world watched with bated breath, anxious, unsure, and deeply moved by the human cost behind every headline. Governments condemned and communicated, alliances shifted, and tensions grew. But beneath those diplomatic maneuvers were ordinary people waking up each day to a sense of dread and hope intertwined. For Iranians, this time will be remembered not only as a moment of conflict, but as a moment when a nation pushed back, not out of malice, but out of a deeply felt need to protect its sense of self. In living rooms, in quiet corners of the streets, that feeling resonated. We are here. We matter. We will not be erased. And as the dust of conflict settled, and the world considered its next move, war, majestated and vedisdeist. One truth became clear. History is not only shaped by battles and missiles, it is shaped by the feelings of millions whose lives were touched by fear, resilience, loss, and an unyielding grip on hope. And yet, as the smoke slowly clears from the skylines and the sirens begin to fade, what remains is not only the memory of explosions, but the weight of reflection. In Iran, families sit together at night discussing what this moment means for their children and their future. Many speak about strength, about standing firm when tested. They do not celebrate destruction. They speak instead about survival, about dignity, about a belief that their nation has the right to defend its soil when it feels cornered. For them, this chapter is painful, but it is also a reminder that they are not powerless. At the same time, across the Gulf, ordinary people hope that this show of force does not spiral into something even greater. There is a shared human desire that echoes beyond politics and military strategy. The desire for safety, stability, and a future where children grow up without the sound of warning sirens overhead. Even in moments of confrontation, there is space for dialogue, for recalculation, for leaders to step back from the edge and consider the human cost of every decision. History often remembers the missiles, the strikes, and the turning points. But it also remembers resilience. It remembers the nations that endured pressure and chose to stand tall. As the world watches what happens next, one thing is certain. This moment has reshaped perceptions, strengthened resolve inside Iran, and reminded the region that sovereignty, pride, and security remain powerful forces in the hearts of millions. The question now is whether that strength can one day open the door, not only to resistance, but to lasting peace.